Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're gonna dig into something a little bit different, a little bit unexpected.
Ooh, I like unexpected.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the power of letting go,
Okay.
but not in like a sad sack kind of way, like
Mhm.
oh I give up, but in a really strategic way.
I'm intrigued.
We're gonna be diving into The Power of Abandonment by Thomasu Dai.
Okay. So for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with Hamasuda, he's actually quite a fascinating guy.
Yeah, he's accomplished a lot.
He has. So he was a top Japanese track and field athlete. In fact, he was the first Japanese athlete to medal in a world-class sprinting event. And for a very long time, he held the Japanese national record in the 400-meter hurdles.
Yeah, like up until very recently.
Yeah, July 2021. And in addition to, being the stellar athlete, he's also a published author. He has books like Winning Alone and The Philosophy of Running.
And if that wasn't enough,
Right.
he's the CEO of Deporter Partners.
He's the director of the Shintoyosu Brilliant Running Stadium. He's a Unitar Goodwill ambassador. And he even has his own YouTube channel called Tamsu Academy.
Yeah, so this is not somebody who is a slouch. Like, this is somebody who is, like, crushed it.
Right.
And so that's why his perspective on this idea of abandonment, or as we're going to unpack it today, letting go, is so compelling. Our mission today is to really understand how he frames this concept. It's not about giving up. It's not negative. It's actually really strategic. It's positive. And it can help you reach your goals and find, like, genuine satisfaction.
I like it already.
Right. So there's some really surprising ideas in his book that we're going to unpack today.
Yeah.
We're really excited to share them with you.
All right, let's dive in. So one of the key things to understanding Thomasu Dai's approach is how he kind of reframes this whole concept of abandonment.
Yeah, that word.
Yeah. He points out that the Japanese word for abandonment, hushi, it's kind of taken on this negative connotation, but like its original meaning actually includes to understand, like to clarify.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And even if you look at Buddhist terms, the character te, this also means to realize or to comprehend.
So wait, hold on. Are you saying that abandonment, like at its core, is actually about gaining a deeper understanding?
I think that's exactly what he's saying. It's about understanding yourself, your situation, your talents, and it's about recognizing where you are right now rather than just, trying to run away or escape something that is difficult.
Okay, that's super interesting. So it's not about defeat. It's about empowerment through clarity, through this deeper understanding.
Yes, exactly. And this is really fundamental because he's not advocating for just quitting everything that's hard.
Right.
It's much more nuanced than that. It's about figuring out where you should be putting your efforts and what to let go of strategically so that you can actually move forward more effectively.
Okay, I like that. Right, so to illustrate this point, he talks about a personal experience when he was 18, and he was competing in track and field.
Right.
And like many sprinters, he was initially really focused on the 100 meters, which is, it's a super competitive event, and it often favors people who have, like, exceptional natural gifts.
Yeah.
And so his coach, seeing his potential, advised him to shift his primary focus, at least for his final year of high school championships and the National Sports Festival, to the 200 and the 400 meters.
Okay.
And the idea was that, okay, if you really want to go back to the 100 meters, you can always go back to it in university.
Got it.
But right now, let's focus on the 200 and the 400. And Thomasu Dai, he wasn't totally thrilled about this initially, but this decision ended up being a total game changer for him.
How so?
Well, he went on to win the 400 meters at the National High School Championships.
Wow.
And he set a national junior record.
That's huge.
Right. And it's such a perfect example of strategically abandoning an initial focus, in this case the 100 meters, to pursue a path where his abilities could really shine.
Yeah. I mean, this story really underscores the point that sometimes changing direction, even if it feels like a step back or like you're, pivoting away from your initial plan, it can actually be the very thing that propels you forward.
Exactly.
And, it wasn't about giving up on sprinting altogether. It was just about being smart about where to put his energy at that specific point in his development as an athlete.
Right. And what's so interesting is that he didn't just stop there, right? He actually continued in track and field. And he goes on to describe in the book, like, the analytical process that he went through after high school that ultimately led him to abandon the 100 meters as his, like, main event.
Oh, so this wasn't just a one-time thing.
Yeah.
He, really went through a process to get there.
He did, yeah. And it wasn't, like, an emotional decision. It was really data-driven.
Yeah.
He was really, really self-aware, and he was comparing his own development as an athlete to that of his competitors. And he realized that his physical growth, which had given him this early advantage, had basically plateaued by the time he was in his third year of middle school.
Uh-huh.
And what's interesting is, if you look at his height and weight at retirement, it was pretty much the same as it was back then.
Wow, that's surprising.
And meanwhile, he was seeing other athletes who had been slower than him in middle school. They were making significant gains in high school.
Oh, interesting. So they were catching up.
Yeah, they were catching up. And so he really looked at the data. He actually looked at the trajectory of their speed improvement, and he compared his own progress against one competitor in particular.
Mm-hmm.
This guy had run an 11.2-second 100 meters back in middle school.
Okay.
And he was really quickly catching up to his times by the time he was in high school. And it became really clear that it was probably only a matter of time before he'd be consistently beaten by this guy.
I see.
And it wasn't just a hunch. It was like looking at the trend lines.
Yeah.
And he went even beyond just his direct competitors in Japan. He also considered the global level. So he looked at the World Youth Athletics Championships.
Okay, so he was thinking about international competition.
He was.
Mm-hmm.
And he realized that there was this significant gap between the best Japanese high schoolers and those world-class athletes.
So like a different tier altogether.
Yeah. And this global perspective really solidified for him the feeling that he was going to be limited in the 100 meters.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, this decision to step back from the 100 meters wasn't about a lack of passion. It wasn't about not being willing to put in the effort.
No.
It was really this data-driven, clear-eyed assessment of his chances.
Right.
And I think that's a really big lesson for everyone listening, right?
Yeah.
How often do we just push and not actually look at the data, the feedback from our environment that might be telling us something different?
Yeah, that we need to make a change.
Exactly. Combining that ambition with objective analysis is so important.
Right. And what's so cool is that he doesn't stop there. He expands this idea, and he looks at other sports.
Okay.
And other areas of life, So for example, he talks about female wrestlers.
Oh, interesting.
Who might change weight classes to avoid an absolutely dominant competitor.
Right.
Yoshida Saori, who was basically unbeatable.
What's the point of even trying to compete in that weight class if you know you're not going to win?
Exactly right. And he also talks about post-retirement career paths for athletes.
Okay.
So many athletes go into commentary, right?
Right.
But he's even that is so competitive.
Right.
You need to actually be good at it. And you need to have, some skills in that area. It's not just about being a famous athlete.
So thinking about your transferable skills.
Exactly. And the market demand.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's not just, oh, I was good at this sport, therefore I will be a good commentator. It's no, you actually need to have some skills.
What are you good at? What are you bringing to the table?
Exactly right. So he also talks about this idea of the illusion of effort.
Ooh, interesting.
Right. So this is a really common belief that if you just work hard enough, long enough, you'll succeed.
Mm-hmm.
But he contrasts that with this idea of choosing a path that's really aligned with your strengths.
Oh, I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Doing what you're actually good at.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really clear that, he's not saying you shouldn't do things that you enjoy, even if the probability of massive success is low.
Right.
But it's about being honest with yourself, about the realistic return on effort.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference between passionate dedication and, unrealistic self-belief.
Right, because sometimes we get so passionate about something that we don't want to see, the reality of it.
Exactly.
That's a great point.
And, that leads to this next idea, which is about recognizing limitations.
Okay.
Which is, super important.
Yeah, tough but important.
So, especially in elite sports, athletes get to a point where they can't really improve that much more, despite their training.
Right.
And this requires accepting those limitations.
Right.
And he doesn't just talk about elite athletes.
No.
He actually connects this to the business world too.
Okay, interesting. How so?
He talks about how people reach different points in their careers.
Mm-hmm.
And he says it's really valuable to consider your options beyond your peak performance years earlier in your career.
Oh, okay. So thinking ahead.
Yeah.
Before you're forced to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that you don't have these regrets later on.
I see.
So it's about, acknowledging that any career path is finite.
Yeah.
And planning for, the next stage.
That's smart.
Right. Okay, now let's talk about the sunk cost fallacy.
Okay, that's always a good one.
Right. So this is like a huge psychological trap.
Yeah.
And he explains this in a really simple way, using the example of buying a movie ticket.
Okay, I like it. I can relate to that.
Right. You've paid for the ticket, but you hate the movie?
Been there.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Do you just stay there
Right.
and suffer through it?
Right.
Because you've already paid.
Right.
Or do you, cut your losses and leave?
Well, logically, you should leave, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of us fall into that trap.
We do. We totally do.
Because we feel like, oh, I've invested this money.
Yeah.
I've invested this time. I need to get something out of it.
Exactly. And, he points out that, especially in Japan, people really feel this strong sense of obligation to their past efforts.
Interesting.
Right. So it's like, I've come this far.
Right.
I can't quit now.
Yeah.
Even if it's, terrible.
Even if you're miserable.
Even if I'm miserable. Right.
Right.
And so he's like, this is where letting go becomes so liberating.
Right.
It's about recognizing when those past investments are holding you back.
Yeah.
Right? Like sometimes you just got to cut your losses and redirect your energy to something that's better.
I think that's a really hard lesson for a lot of people, though.
It is.
Especially, in certain cultures.
Yeah. Okay. So then he talks about this other illusion that he calls the 1 in 100 illusion.
Okay, what's that?
So this is the belief that, if you just work hard enough,
No.
you'll eventually be that 1 in 100 success story in whatever field you choose.
Oh, okay, yeah, like that one special person.
Right.
Yeah.
And while he doesn't say, you shouldn't strive for excellence, he does say you really need to be realistic about your chances.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this actually attainable?
Right.
Or are you just, holding on to this dream that's not really realistic?
Yeah, because holding on to those unrealistic aspirations for too long, that can actually prevent you from growing.
Exactly.
Because you might be missing other opportunities.
Right.
So how do you find that balance?
Right. Exactly right.
Right.
How do you balance, ambition and a grounded perspective?
Yeah, it's tricky.
It is tricky. And he offers this interesting counterpoint. He says it's important to exert, full effort.
Okay.
But it's to discover your limits.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
So push yourself to the max.
Yeah, so that you can really see what you're capable of.
Just to know where your ceiling is.
Right.
Yeah.
And that even if you fail, that gives you clarity about what you can and cannot do.
Makes sense.
Right.
So you know what your range is.
Exactly.
You know what you're working with.
Exactly. And he talks about developing this body's sense value, which is this intuitive understanding of what you can actually achieve.
Oh, interesting.
And without that, people set goals that are either too high or too low.
Right. And they end up either constantly disappointed or they never reach their full potential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay, now we're going to talk about the big question.
Okay, hit me.
When is the right time to change course?
Yeah.
Right. When should you let go?
It's a big question.
It is a big question. And he says there's no, magic formula.
Right.
There's no specific moment.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
But he does say it often comes down to a sense of readiness.
Okay.
And he puts it at 70%.
70%.
70% ready for that next step.
Interesting.
You don't need to have everything figured out.
Right. You just need to be mostly there.
Mostly there.
Mm.
And then be willing to learn and adapt as you go.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And he also acknowledges that it's really difficult to change directions when you have to consider other people's expectations.
Oh, that's tough.
Right.
Yeah.
And he uses this really powerful example of infertility treatment.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Okay.
So, you have this deep emotional investment. There's
Yeah.
this intense desire to have a child. And deciding when to stop pursuing that can be incredibly difficult, especially when you have family and friends who have all these expectations.
And who want it so badly for you.
Exactly. And so it just highlights how letting go can be really, really hard when you have to consider the hopes and dreams that other people have for you.
Yeah, it's like you're letting them down, too.
Exactly. And that leads to this other really interesting point he makes about the language that we use.
Oh, okay.
Right. So he says we should try to reframe these negative terms.
Right, like stopping and giving up and stuff.
Exactly. So instead of saying stopping, maybe say reselecting.
Oh, I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Or instead of saying abandoning, say correcting your course.
Much more positive.
Right. It takes away that feeling of failure.
Totally.
Right. And it puts you in this mindset of, okay, I'm making a strategic move to something better.
Yeah, it's about finding a better fit for your skills, right?
Exactly.
Rather than like admitting defeat.
And he actually goes so far as to say, maybe if you're not successful in one area, it just means it's not a good match for you, right? And your talents might be much better suited to something else.
Right.
So, okay, he also talks about this myth of universal talent.
Oh, okay.
So this is this idea that if you're successful in one area,
Yeah.
you'll be successful in any area.
Right. Like if you're a good athlete, you'll be a good business person.
Exactly. Or like if you're a bad student, you're going to be bad at everything.
Right, right.
And he's like, no, everyone has different abilities, different aptitudes.
Right.
Right. And it's really important to find a path that actually suits you, your talents.
Because we only have so much time, right?
Yeah.
So we might as well use it wisely.
Exactly. And so, I think a lot of people struggle with this idea of like, how do I know if I'm making the right choice?
Oh, yeah. That's the big one, right?
When do I let go? How do I know?
How do I know if I'm giving up too early or if
Yeah.
I'm, hanging on for too long?
Right. And he acknowledges this. He's like, yeah, there's no guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
But what he does say is what might seem like a setback in the short term could actually lead to greater success in the long run.
Right. Like sometimes you have to take a couple steps back to go forward.
Exactly. And what matters most, he says, is that you feel good about the decision when you make it.
Oh, I like that.
Right. It's about that internal affirmation.
Right. It's not about what other people think.
Exactly. It's about what you think, how you feel about it.
Yeah, because ultimately you're the one who has to live with the decision.
Exactly. And he also talks about the value of rituals in providing closure.
Rituals.
Yeah, like if you're stopping something, having some kind of ritual to mark that transition.
Interesting. Like what?
Well, it could be anything, right? It could be, I don't know, like writing down what you've learned.
Okay.
And then like burning the paper.
Oh.
Or, just taking some time to reflect and say goodbye to that part of your life.
I see. So it's like a symbolic way of moving on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, and then he talks about like the flip side of this.
Okay.
Which is like the danger of delaying important decisions. Right. So he's not saying that you should never postpone things.
Right.
But he says, there are certain key life choices.
Yeah.
And those you shouldn't procrastinate on.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And he really encourages you to like constantly question what is actually important to you.
Mm-hmm.
So that you don't get stuck in this pattern of just like putting things off.
So being proactive about your life.
Exactly. And, he also points out that when you let go of something, it's not just about that one thing.
Oh, right.
Right. It also affects your relationships.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Because when you change direction, you're often also detaching from connections.
Mm-hmm.
You're detaching from people who maybe supported you in that old path.
Right.
And he acknowledges that that can be hard.
Yeah, because you're like leaving behind a community maybe.
Exactly. But he also says, when you do that, you create the potential for new connections.
Right. New beginnings.
New beginnings. Exactly. And he also makes this really cool observation about like changing your environment.
Okay.
Like physically changing your environment.
Oh, okay.
So like if you're trying to start fresh, move to a new city.
Oh, I see.
Or even just rearrange your furniture.
Okay, so shake things up a little bit
Yeah.
to get out of that rut.
It's about getting out of that rut. It's about disrupting old patterns.
I like it.
And, he then talks about this pressure of national expectations.
Okay.
And he specifically talks about Japanese athletes at the London Olympics.
Okay, yeah. The Olympics are always high pressure.
They are. And he talks specifically about judo because Japan has this really strong tradition in judo.
Right.
And so there's this huge expectation to win gold medals.
Yeah, like gold or nothing.
Exactly. And even if an athlete won a silver or bronze medal, it was seen as like a failure.
Oh, wow.
Even though overall Japan won a ton of medals.
So it's like this inability to let go of that like singular expectation.
Exactly. And, he talks about this phenomenon. It's like, I don't know why I lost.
Oh, interesting.
And he uses the examples of Fukushima Chisato, who was a sprinter,
Okay.
and Kohei Uchimura, who was like a legendary gymnast.
Oh, yeah, I know him.
Right. And both of them experienced these like unexpected poor performances, even though they felt totally prepared.
Wow, that's got to be so frustrating.
So frustrating.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like there's no clear explanation.
Right.
And it just shows you, like, even with the best preparation, sometimes things just don't go your way.
Right. And sometimes you just don't know why.
Right, exactly. And so he talks about this idea of analyzing failures right away.
Okay.
While the memory's fresh.
Like in the moment.
Yeah, in the moment. Don't wait like months or years later when your memories are all fuzzy.
Right, because then you start making excuses for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then he also cautions against romanticizing struggle.
Ooh, that's an interesting one.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's this idea that, like, if you just keep pushing through hardship, you'll eventually succeed.
Right, yeah.
He's like, no, for most people, that's just not true.
Yeah.
Like, perseverance is great,
Yeah.
but it's not a guarantee.
Right. Sometimes you're just banging your head against a wall.
Exactly. And, he also talks about this disconnect between, like, this idea of chase your dreams and the coach's responsibility, which is to help the athlete win.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So, like, coaches might say all this stuff about, like, the value of pursuing dreams, but at the end of the day, they want their athletes to win.
Right, because they're judged by results.
Exactly. And so he talks about this idea of having alternative options.
Okay.
So even if you're totally committed to what you're doing right now, knowing that you have other options, that can actually be really helpful.
How so?
Well, it reduces the pressure.
Oh, okay.
Right. It gives you this feeling of, like, okay, if this doesn't work out, I have other things I can do.
Right, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And he says, in Japan especially, it's not really acceptable to talk about having other options.
Oh, interesting.
Because it's seen as like, oh, you're not fully dedicated.
Yeah.
But he's like, no, I think it's actually really healthy to have those options.
Yeah, to have that backup plan.
Exactly. And he also talks about different coaching philosophies.
Okay.
So in the West, it's more common to hire a coach.
Right.
Right. You're hiring them for their expertise.
For their guidance.
Exactly. But in Japan, it's more this like master-disciple relationship.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a much deeper commitment.
Right.
And he actually advocates for like a more objective view of coaching.
Okay.
He thinks athletes should be able to change coaches if the relationship isn't working.
Right. To have that freedom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, he talks about this marathon runner, Fujiwara Shin, who trains independently.
Okay.
And he's actually been criticized for that.
Oh, wow.
Because it goes against that traditional coaching model.
Interesting.
And he also has this like quick little aside about how the UK exerts influence on the world stage.
Okay.
And he contrasts it with like more overt displays of power.
Okay.
And he's basically saying like they use soft power.
Oh, interesting. So it's about finding like a more strategic position.
Exactly right. Yeah. And that leads to this question of like, what is winning? Right. Like, how do we define winning?
Right. Yeah. Because we always talk about like wanting to win, but what does that actually mean?
Exactly. And he says, the British tend to think about this a lot.
Okay.
Like, what does winning actually mean?
Yeah.
And then he brings up this management adage that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've heard that one.
Right. And he specifically applies this to elite sports.
Okay.
And he's like, okay, so what are we actually measuring?
Right.
Right. Are we just focused on gold medals and Nobel Prizes?
Yeah.
And is that really what success is about?
Right.
Or is it about something more internal?
I mean, those are external markers of success, but maybe there's something deeper.
Exactly. And he really encourages us to set our own standards for success.
I like that.
Right. Don't just rely on what society tells you.
Yeah, define your own success.
Exactly. And he also makes this distinction between just like putting in effort and actually choosing where to direct that effort.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just work hard. You got to work smart too.
Right. Because you could be working really hard at the wrong thing.
Exactly.
And then what's the point?
Exactly. And he also contrasts American culture with Japanese culture.
Okay.
He says in America, there's this tendency to praise effort and recognize diverse talents. But in Japan, it's much more focused on academic and athletic achievements.